If you don't know that somebody gave because somebody asked them to, let's look at all giving history as. Let's start with the assumption that they gave because of alignment with values and identity. They gave because, number one, generosity is important to them as a person, to their identity as they see themselves. Most people, according to psychological studies, most people walk around and think of themselves as generous, kind, caring people.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with my friend, Clay Buck. Clay, welcome back to What the Fundraising.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Let's just give everyone a little overview of you, what you do, what brings you to this conversation, and then we're going to get into all the juiciness.
So, I'm Clay. I, for the last 5 years, have been running an independent consulting agency, Next River Fundraising Strategies. I focus on individual giving, from acquisition through major gifts. So I deal with all the strategy and all the stuff that goes into individual giving. I'm a reluctant data nerd and storyteller, and champion of all things generosity. So these are my favorite conversations. I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay, wait. What does that mean, reluctant data nerd?
I'm a theater major, for crying out loud. So there's nothing about me nothing in my background. I mean, I failed college algebra 3 times. Like, I'm not a math person. My brain does not work. My brain works in stories. It doesn't work in data. So I say I'm a reluctant data nerd because, I mean, you know this life. When you're the one person shop, you have to do all things. And I realized very early on that being able to contact donors was about being able to have good data and understand the data. And so I used to kick around the country with my big 3-piece, 4 megabyte, whatever it was, desktop with the big monitor and, all the stuff. And taught myself Excel back in the days of Clippy and, Mavis Beacon teaches typing, right? So I learned it because I had to. And I sort of take the approach that, seriously, truly, if I can learn it, then anybody can, right?
Okay, so I love that we're starting here because I feel like you, in my mind, have such a good understanding and handle on data, and not just data for data's sake, but data for the purpose of deepening relationships and having really genuine connections with donors. And so I love that you started there because I also had a lot of stories around sort of like math and my aptitude at really understanding. I felt very resistant to data, technology. Sure. I was like, that's not how my brain works, right? Exactly. Sure. And so, but you are just such walking proof of how we can overcome a lot of those things. And so I think for folks who are listening to this, who maybe feel that way about their data or their database, but also are feeling this level of kind of like uncertainty around their donor relationships and feeling like, I don't know how to move things forward the way I want to. I don't know how to deepen connection, and maybe haven't considered that some of the solutions that are inside that data.
Yeah. Let me start here with no shame intended, no admonition, no finger pointing or finger wagging, but your best donor. If you are a nonprofit, if you are a fundraiser, if you're an executive director with any amount of data in your system, any amount of previous donors, anything, your best donor is not somebody you haven't met yet. It's somebody already in your database. And this is one of the hardest things, I think, in the first steps of quote unquote getting it. It's not about getting data. It's about getting people. And if we look at that, there isn't some big mystical concept of donor that is out there. If you look at a Venn diagram of humans to donors, the overlap is 100%, right? Because everybody is generous in some way. If you have any data, if you have any records in any system, you already have people who have indicated that they care. And that's the very first step. Right, is acknowledging and accepting that the information that we have points to real live human caring people. And it's on us to be able to schmudge that relationship, because let's stop thinking of data as data, right? Like it's hard, this hard, difficult concept. Data that we collect, that we have in our systems, these are the stories donors are telling us. So we talk about so much about storytelling out, right? Storytelling to donors, when what people are telling us about themselves, is the story they're telling us. So if someone cares enough about you to share their name, their email address, their address, their phone number, anything, they're saying to you, hey, here I am, see me, right? The donor that doesn't share anything with you, they don't want, right? This is the person that gives you the fake email address or the Gmail address that, they only give to people they don't want to hear from, right? We all have one, don't deny it, right? If somebody is sharing any level of information with you, that is something about them they want you to know. So the first step to me in relationships is just acknowledging that. There's no big mystery. There's no big metrics. There's no big nothing. It's just, hey, these 1,000 people, these 500 people, these 10,000 people have told me their name and a way to contact them. Boom. First step.
Wow. Okay. So we have, I love this. Okay. So we have that data, right? We have there, and I love that way of thinking about it, that the data that they're sharing with us is part of how they're storytelling to us. I love thinking about that framing. So we have that data. Maybe we have some inclination about what they care about, things like that. But then the other piece of data that we have is their giving history, right?
Correct.
And then we start to create all these other kind of like data metrics related to their giving history. We start to call them lapsed, or we start to call them recurring, or we start to call them, right. And we put them into categories. And again, all of that is related to, at the end of the day, money. And then we start to create news stories for that donor, right? Based on what they have told us or haven't told us and the money piece. And we don't often, to your point, maybe include a lot of other information that they actually are sharing, or ways in which they're interacting with us that are telling a story in their whole kind of data story. Talk to me a little bit how you think about that. Like, how do we avoid, knowing that the lagging indicator of money in the door is one of the ways that as fundraisers we're being tracked and measured, and that's what's the breathing down our neck. How do we avoid having the donor story become all about this transactional relationship, and like, what metrics can we use to change that?
Great. So a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Yes.
a lot to unpack there. So when a donor gives, when a person gives to an organization, they're doing so because one of two reasons. One, they care about the cause. They care about the mission, something about it connected with them. And more than likely, it hit on personal identity and values. The second reason somebody gave is because somebody asked them to. People give to people. I love peer-to-peer campaigns. I think they're one of the greatest tools that we can do, to have a peer, have someone like me, like Seth Godin says, people like us do things like this, right? You ask me, Mallory, my friend, you ask me to support a cause that you care about, I'm more than likely going to give because I know you, I trust you, I like you. I might be supporting a cause that isn't necessarily part of my identity set or my value set. So I think in our data, we've got those two. If you don't know that somebody gave because somebody asked them to, let's look at all giving history as. Let's start with the assumption that they gave because of alignment with values and identity. They gave because, number one, generosity is important to them as a person, to their identity as they see themselves. Most people, according to psychological studies, most people walk around and think of themselves as generous, kind, caring people. We know this from Drs. Adrian Sargent and Jen Shang at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. People think of themselves as kind and generous. Giving Tuesday, our friend Woodrow did the study, right? Worldwide, 86% of people indicated that they are generous. So people think of themselves as givers. So first, let's look at that. They gave to us, therefore they see themselves as generous. If all we have is name, address, and giving information, we can reflect back and say, Mallory, thank you for being a generous person. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being you. Thank you for engaging with us in this mission. Because our first step is, let's assume positive intent and come back to that. Simple metrics. They gave us their information. We know how to contact them, period, right? We can assume generous person. We can also assume a generous person who cares about this cause. But this is really where we have to get into the you statements versus us statements. Because if our first message back is about us, then we haven't reflected back to them who they are through their giving, through their actions. We haven't reflected back the story they're telling themselves. So let me give you a deeper example of this too, because we do often do this, right? We segment by lapsed and long lapsed, and lie button, sigh button, I can guarantee you nobody is walking around going, hey, look at me, I'm a lie bunt, right? And taking pride in the fact that I'm a lie bunt, right? I have for the last 5-6 years. One of the things that I do a lot of, as you know, is donor engagement reports, database audits, looking at quality of data and giving history. In almost every single file, there is a group of what I call consistent but not consecutive. And you have to see them over a long period. 5 years is good, 10 years is better. And what happens is they'll make a gift in year one, for example. They'll make a gift in year one. In year two, they go to the gala and they purchase a silent auction item and, maybe give something at the raise the paddle. The year three, they don't give. They don't give again until late in year four, and that's at the holiday campaign. And now we've tagged them as a holiday donor. Now they don't give for 2 years. The point of the story is over a longer period of time, they're coming in and out, right, of being a donor. And in our terminology, they're current, they're lapsed, they're current, they're lapsed, they're current, they're lapsed, right? In their mind, so what we have done is we have isolated those groups and then started communicating with them directly to that behavior. So, for example, let's say you were one of these consistent but not consecutive, and what I would do is I would reach out and say, dear Mallory, hey, we have been doing some work on our data, we've been doing some work on our systems, and we really wanted to reach out and let you know that what we've seen that you have been giving and supporting Wayward Wombats for the last 10 years. It means you're one of our most generous and loyal supporters, and we just wanted to take a minute and thank you for being a part of the mission, right? And then we do a targeted sort of messaging couple or 3 times where we include soft asks that ultimately culminate in a hard ask. So, Mallory, we noticed that over the last 10 years, you give on average about $50 a year. Would you consider making a quarterly gift of $25, which is right about where you have given, which would be a total of $100 a year? We can put that on a credit card on our recurring payment plan so you don't have to worry about it. You're fulfilling your belief in our mission, and you're giving us sustainable, reliable income that we know we can count on because we know you care about Wayward Wombats. Something like that. That's rough off the top of my head, but that's the general idea. These people convert to recurring like nobody's business because in our minds, they're lapsed, they're current, they're lapsed, they're current, they're long lapsed, they're current, right? In their minds, of course I support Wayward Wombats. That's who I am. That's what I do. They're not paying attention to when they last gave or tax deductibility time or any of that. The relationship they're defining, right? They're out there going, of course I support Wayward Wombats. And when we say, hey, Mallory, we noticed that you haven't given in a while, they go, yeah, I did. Of course I did. No, it was 3 years ago. Well, we have short-term memory. Like, we don't know, right? So it's, to me, the data that we're gathering is all about reflecting back to them that initial start of the relationship, kind, generous, caring person, and the behavior that they're showing to us. I will also take this moment to say, again, with all due respect and love in my heart, channel is the weakest segmentation that we have. Just because somebody gives by mail does not make them a direct mail donor. Just because they give online does not make them an online donor. And we do a disservice when we segment solely by channel of action. Do not confuse channel of action with channel of engagement. They are two different things.
Okay, talk a little bit more about that.
There are multiple studies that show us that hard mail drives online giving and vice versa. So anybody that does any amount of direct mail can tell you I don't have one on my desk. I'm going to do the visual, right? We get reply slips from like 3 years ago. It happens all the time. And what happens is an email will go out and reference a mail solicitation. People have stuck that reply device with their checks or however their process is for paying bills. And then they go, oh, I want them to think that I got this and that I meant to send it back then. So they pull out an old slip that they've been holding on to because they meant to give, right? We also know that mail prompts online. So you can track online and one of the best things to do with this, and I know our platforms do it and do it well, is to create a unique URL in your CRM for that particular appeal. And you put that in the reply device and people go to that appeal. And then hey, they're giving to that appeal because they went to that giving page, right? And we're not tremendously good at this as a sector, but we know that those things are prompting each other. Text prompts people to give online and vice versa. Like, there's all kinds of things. It's wishy-washy and wibbly-wobbly and all over the place, right? So when we segment by channel, we're doing a disservice to some of our donors that may or may not be in. Honestly, there's a lot of studies that are showing the fastest growing population in responding to direct mail is Gen Z, believe it or not. Yeah, because they didn't have grandparents that sent them newspaper clippings. They had grandparents that sent them Facebook posts, right? So they get something in the mail, and this is novel. It's new. It's different. And every time I bring that up in a conference, somebody goes, well, not my grandchild. Okay, well, not yours. Yes, understood. But from kind of a generic, right, overall, right?
Yes. Okay, so let's think about like the smaller organization that is using like a CRM like Donor Perfect. What are they? And they maybe are trying to figure out how to get more sophisticated or maybe sophisticated is the wrong word. They're trying to get more relationship oriented in their fundraising. They're feeling that tug and stress around how are they going to hit their end of year goals, right? Like you and I know this, like the uncertainty of how are we going to get there, and not feeling, maybe I'll just speak for myself, like safe in my body that I'm going to achieve my goal until that money really comes in the door, led to a lot of kind of anxiety throughout the year of feeling like, am I doing the things that are ultimately going to lead towards this metric that I'm being held accountable for? And not just that my organization relies on, and both, my friends, my employees, myself, all of these things, and in addition to the services and beneficiaries. But one of the things that I feel like is so important for our sector that you're talking about here too is like, how do we think about and measure other forms of engagement and relationships and connection, not just engagement, not just like, did you open this thing I sent you, but really like points of connection, so that we can start to understand in our data earlier in the year, okay, look, at this point last year, here's what the metrics were looking like in terms of engagement, connection, response rate, these things. And this is how much you ultimately raised at the end of the year. So you're on track, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or these things are a lot lower than what was happening last year. We need to take a step back, adjust, try some new things if we ultimately want to trend towards these outcomes at the end of the year. So how do you like help your clients kind of prioritize tracking some of those KPIs? What are more of those KPIs so that they are not in November biting their nails like, I have no idea what's going to happen?
So, as always, let me start sort of with a story and then build into the answer, if I may, right? So 3 times a week, I meet my trainer. I do 30 minutes on the treadmill, and then I meet him for an hour, and we do weights and strength training and all of that. And I said to him a couple of weeks ago, I said, is 3 times a week enough to hit the goals that we've established? And he gives me that look. I'm like, it's not, is it? He goes, no. I said, well, what should I be doing on the other 2 or 3 days a week? And he listed some things. And one of the things that he mentioned was, and you should really spend time on the stair climber. Well, see, in my mind, right, in order to achieve fitness goals, you have to work out for 30 minutes a day, at least 30 minutes of aerobic activity. And I looked at him and went, I can't do 30 minutes on a stair climber. And he goes, who said 30 minutes? Start with 2. And it was one of the, like, I'm nervous about the stair climber. I hate the stair climber. I don't want to do the stair climber. And I have always looked at it as, I got to do 30 minutes on the stair. He goes, do 2 for 2 weeks. And it was a reminder to me of the concept of chunking. And this is my answer to your question, right? It's also where I borrow, honestly, from you a lot in dysregulating, right, the nervous system and how we approach it. First, I am willing to bet that most of the people that you're talking about and to are getting pressure from their boards and their leadership to find new wealthy donors. This is what I'm hearing over and over and over again, right? I want to help that so much because that's not the answer. Mackenzie Scott is not the answer. Bill Gates is not the answer. Oprah is not the answer. The answer is, especially now, digging deep into relationships with your community. So as much as you can, stand into the leadership of that, right? Secondly, the next most important thing, and you're not expecting this answer, and neither is anybody else. The next most important thing is having a plan, is having a solid written plan. When there is a written fundraising plan in place, chances of success are 148% higher. Here's the thing that a plan does. Number one, it sets the goal. So plans have to be based on the goal. We got to raise $1.3 million this year. Okay, that's your plan. Where are you going to do it, right? And you list out at the beginning of the year, where is every dollar going to come from, right? Secondly, it's stepping into, if you have a written plan and you've put it in front of everybody that needs to, no, I can't. I was going to be off color for a minute. There's a phrase that we use when everybody has to insert their opinion on something, right? So everybody has reviewed the plan and signed off on it, and everybody agrees to it. everyone is now accountable to the plan. A lot of the year-end or holiday scramble comes from getting to it without having a plan in place. So we get to November, we get to October, and we're trying to create the plan as we go. We're trying to build the plane while we fly it. And we're getting a whole lot of information from everybody else. Economy's bad. This is the holidays. We shouldn't be asking, and we're listening and absorbing that. And I find if we can go back to a written plan that we established and say, this is what we decided. This is what everybody thumbs up and approved. I have kept you apprised of the plan. We are sticking to the plan. Thank you for your suggestion. It's not in this year's plan. We'll add it to next year's consideration, but right now we're going to focus on what we plan. The reason I tell the story about my trainer is because that is the answer to your question about how do we approach it, how do we determine the metrics, et cetera. It's chunking it. You don't have to do $1.3 million from 1,000 donors in 1 month. You got 12 months to do it. You don't have to fix every single record. You don't have to fix all those duplicates in your database overnight. You can take 30 minutes a day and fix 10 duplicates a day. You can deputize your team. Hey, we're all going to take, or your coworkers or whatever, we're all going to take 30 minutes this afternoon and we're going to clean 10 records each, okay? And then you start to see the incremental results, right? If we're going to talk about specific metrics, the other thing too that I see is we try to measure too much, right? We're trying to measure total dollars and average gift and cost per dollar and lifetime and. The metrics to measure come from the goals that you establish in your plan. All right. So if you're setting a $1.3 million, I'm just using that number just for example, right? You're setting a $1.5 million goal. Well, what does that mean? Is that 1.5 million from 5 major donors? Is that 1.5 million from a mix of foundations, corporations, individuals? And then underneath that, what's that mix, right? Because those are very different strategies and very different tactics. And that's what diversifying that we hear so much about is about, right? So therefore, we got to raise $1.5 million. We're doing that from a mix of foundations, corporations, events, and individuals. Well, now I've got my 4 categories where I know, okay, so individuals, well, we need 1,000 donors, let's say, 1,000 individual donors. Well, that informs our metrics. How many new donors? How many renewing donors? What's important to us? Do we need to be in acquisition mode or are we in reactivation mode? Those are different structures, different approaches, different strategies, and therefore that informs the metrics. So I'm always a little hesitant to say you should measure this because what you measure relates to your goals and not everybody has the same goals. Now, I definitely do think that donor retention is a core metric, a core KPI that everybody should be looking at. It is cheaper to retain a donor than it is to acquire a donor, period. End of discussion, any way you look at it, right? Whether major gifts or acquisition, it is cheaper to retain than it is to acquire. So donor retention to me is a core metric that everyone should. That's the only should I'm going to give. Everyone should measure, right? But other than that, it's what matters most to you. Sorry?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really, really helpful framing. And I really appreciate the intentionality between your goals and what you're measuring. And I can totally relate to the measuring too much. Like, I feel like that's a trap I've gotten into as a fundraiser, as a business owner, where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to figure out a way to use all these metrics later. I know I will. So I'm just going to start to figure out how to track it all now.
Right.
And then later I'll figure out how to digest it. But I'm not really taking that intentionality between what's the metrics I should be looking at every single day, and making sure that the reason that I want to look at them every single day is because they are so ingrained in the goal that I'm already thinking about every single day, that the metrics inform how I feel about that goal and where I'm at.
To that point, you know what I'm far, far, far more interested in measuring? Come in on Monday and make a list. Here's the 5 donors I'm going to call this week. Here's the 20 donors I'm going to email this week. Here's the 5 letters of intent I'm going to get out this week. Set the goal of activity and let the results come, right? And then you get to the end of the week on Friday and you check them all off and you go, I called 7 donors and I sent 25. Wow, right? And again, all due respect to our CRMs, we overcrowd our dashboards, because we think, like you said, we need all these numbers. Well, maybe we don't. Maybe we just need average gift and retention, Maybe we just need to keep track for ourselves of how many emails I sent, how many contacts I made. Oh, what's that? Hold on. You ask me a question because there's I'm going to find a quote that is relative to what I just said that I think you'll love.
So I'm curious, like, okay, so those are the metrics around kind of like our behavior, maybe that we're tracking. And then what you're saying is that in terms of the other kind of like donor engagement behaviors or relationship building behaviors, those would be tied to the goals that we have around connection points. So for example, if we wanted to measure that we are deepening connection, and I hate all of these terms, but with our mid-level donors, right?
Yes.
Then the metrics we would be looking at would be sort of engagement, response metrics, attendance at events, all related to that group, comparing it year over year, right? You'd be like, okay, we started these initiatives. We've done, here's what's happening on our end action-wise in terms of either outreach or personalization, things like that. And then here's the response that we're seeing in terms of how this is impacting the behavior of our mid-level donors. Are they sharing more of their story with us? Are they coming to things more because of these things? And then we're measuring those activities throughout the year. And then ultimately, we're going to see at the end of the year how that impacts their investment and involvement in the organization.
And we're able to, with the tech that we have now, we're able to measure with the tech that we have now. I become the old guy in the corner, right? He's fancy schmancy. I mean, we can see engagement things. How often did they click on our website? How long did they leave? Cart abandonment. Did they open the email? Did they click throughs? All of these are good indicators, and many of our CRMs do already track them, and every one of them is something that informs us. We also live in a world where third-party data, that is data that we can add to and append our records, is so plentiful. So, a traditional wealth screening, like we talk about, but hey, it's 2025 and wealth screenings have gone far beyond what they used to be of just wealth. And now it's much more about behavior and identity and philanthropy and all of that. So, we can append data to it. And as somebody that, really, really believes in and uses third-party data a lot, I know it's expensive. I know it's time-consuming. I know it's one more thing to add to the plate, and do what you can do. I mean, again, I started fundraising in 1996. Our database of record at the time, I promise you, was if you had doubt about what was in the computer, it was go to the card file. And you did. We had a big file. It was kept under lock and key. And there was a 3x5 card in every file that had how many contacts, how many this, that, and the other that, in handwriting. And if you didn't know, you went to it. And my point in saying that is we did just fine. We did just fine with name, address, giving information, right? All of this other stuff is great. It's great. And if you can add it and use it, do it, because it's going to get us closer. Here is the main thing. The main thing is, and this is a study from Arriva from a few years ago, that donors indicate that they would be willing to give more. 10%, I'm not going to get the stat exactly right, but donors would be willing, like 148 or 136% of donors would be willing to give more for a personalized experience with a charity. And they indicated they would give at least 10% more. So one of the very best things that we can do is get salutation right. If we can get salutation right, and honestly, that first acknowledgement of gift receipt is the best way to do it.
To confirm it.
Yeah, dear Mallory, thank you so much. We have, and we get hung up on receipts. We do. And we do need to send receipts, right? I agree, but I'd much rather get a warm and fuzzy thank you letter out in 48 hours that says, Dear Mallory, thank you so much. We've received your gift. We are putting it to work right away. So you know that your intent for Wayward Wombats is going right to work right away. In the next few days, we will get your receipt we can use for your tax purposes, but we just wanted to say thank you, first of all, and secondly, to confirm that we have your information correct. How would you like for us to address you? Do you prefer Mallory or Ms. Erickson, right? Like, let's put that power in the donor's hands of telling us what we want to be called, and stop taking names off credit cards. Everything that we do in terms of processing and capturing data is about acknowledging that relationship. I get so many letters addressed to Dear Thomas because that's my first name. I never put that in a giving form, never, which means that it tells me they're taking my name off the credit card. So it's simple things like that. Here, I want to go back to before we get totally away from it. And I realize I've gone all over the place today talking about measurement. Anybody that's known me for a minute knows that I am a Henry Nouwen reader, fan, whatever, Jesuit monk, theorist, theologian. He wrote a book called A Spirituality of Fundraising, which is phenomenal. But one of his quotes, here's the question to ask yourself in measuring metrics. Did I offer peace today? Did I bring a smile to someone's face? Did I say words of healing? Did I let go of my anger and resentment? Did I forgive? Did I love? These are the real questions. And if we can take some of that framing into setting our metrics, retention's great. But what's going to drive retention is those five phone calls to donors that I make this week. What's going to drive retention are those 5 handwritten notes that I get out before the end of the week. Those little things that we can set aside 15, 20 minutes, stop worrying about the whole and focus just on that for 15, 20 minutes a day. Whatever it is, it doesn't all have to be done all at once.
I think that's such important advice because, we're talking about sort of building deeper, more connected relationships. And we're trying to balance this human kind of, I don't want to say the word slow because I don't feel like connection is sort of always slow, but like this really like intentional process with speed and efficiency. And then we find ourselves at this, like a little bit, I think of this tension point of like, what I love about what you just read is I hear this intentionality. I hear this slowness. I hear this consciousness around how we're treating people, how we're being in relationships. And yes, I think you've given so much today about how we do that sort of at scale by thinking about data and using data to inform our ability to show up that way for people at scale, because we can't keep it all in our head. It's impossible. And so, but I also just want to sort of acknowledge what I think is a really natural tension of how it feels inside of us to be taking this slow human connected process and trying to do it at scale. And I think maybe there's a piece that I'm thinking about this for the first time, like really absorbing what you've said and what you read of acceptance for us. That makes sense that it feels a little bit abnormal, right? Or it feels different, like that we're trying to marry these things, but just because it feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong, right? And doesn't mean that it isn't possible.
Can we just acknowledge that, in my opinion, fundraising is a weird thing to do? Because our whole job is about living in the middle, right? On one hand, we are hearing, in many cases, some of the worst stories of people and of human existence. Anybody that works in animal welfare will tell you that the stories you hear about animals it destroys your soul, right? And on the other hand, we're expected to work with the highest, most emotional, most beautiful thing about humans, which is generosity. And we have to live in that middle, right? And our job is to connect the people that need with the people that can and want to help. And we've got to be splitting both because we also have to live in the middle of transactional numbers, crunching, budgets, goals. And we have to do this thing that looks like sales and feels like sales and looks like marketing and feels like marketing, but isn't either one, and do touchy-feely, goopy human relations stuff. And our finance director wants us to not be goopy-feeling, touchy-feely relations. They want us to be data-driven. But we're human. It's a lot. It's a lot. And the only way I know to get through it is to chunk it. I know I've talked about that, but just chunk what you have to do. When you got to crunch data, shut the door, work from home, whatever you can and can do. 30 minutes. I'm going to do 30 minutes. I'm going to crunch this data. I'm going to clean this right now. That's what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to track metrics, or I'm going to determine budget goals, whatever it is, right? And keep some separation in those worlds, because what matters most is that the beneficiary gets served, and the beneficiary gets served because we are bridging the gap with the donor. And donors don't care about our missions, our strategic plans. our budgets. They care about the person on, or the thing or the situation on the other end of the mission. And our job is to bring the two together.
Okay, that's such a good way to wrap this up. Tell everybody thank you for all of this.
Thank you for all of this, everybody.
No, sorry. Will you tell everybody
No,
where
I'm
they can
teasing you.
connect
I'm
with you? Where they can connect with you, learn more, work with you. My brain is spinning on all the knowledge. I just wanted to thank you before I handed that over.
Yeah, on social media, primarily on LinkedIn, I'm everywhere as T. Clay Buck. You can also find me at nextriverfundraising.com. Nels Clay at nextriverfundraising.com. But either of those places, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for walking through this, and thanks for naming that at the end, that and it's okay that we feel uncomfortable, and it's okay that we feel like we're walking this weird tightrope between these two different worlds. And maybe the best way of approaching that is, I love that, is that's a big piece of the bucketing and the sort of maybe, segmentation in our brain to be able to occupy those different worlds that we sit at the intersection of. So I think that's such wise words. Thank you so much.
Thank you.